For 3 years, I breathed in silence and shadows inside Ashford Manor, a grand estate tucked deep within the foggy countryside of Surrey. From the outside, it looked like a place pulled straight from a Gothic novel, rose vines crawling up the stone walls, frost settling quietly on the glass windows. But inside, it was colder. Not from the weather, but from grief. From isolation. From him. Charles Ashford. The name alone once turned heads at every gala. He was the only son of Lady Evelyn Ashford and heir to the Ashford name, money, and legacy. They said he was born to lead, destined to charm. But none of that mattered after the accident. One crash on a wet motorway, one moment of bad luck, and his vision was stolen from him. Permanently, they thought. I came into the picture shortly after, hired not as a nurse, but as a companion. I was told he needed someone to help him adjust. In truth, they just needed someone to endure his moods. He never asked my name. Never cared to. To him, I was Miss Whitmore, the girl who poured his tea, who read aloud from his mail, who described the changing seasons to someone who could no longer see them. But he needed me. He needed someone to lean on when the pain clawed too deep. He needed someone to sit in the dark beside him and not be afraid of the silence. He needed someone who wouldn't leave, someone unlike everyone else. He never knew that we had met long ago, back when our world was still innocent. He never knew that I was the same girl who used to write him letters under the name E. I was his pen pal from Newcastle, the girl he once claimed to love through ink and folded paper. He never knew because Lady Ashford made sure of that. She found out about our letters when we were 16. I still remember the letter that never reached me, the one he said he would write asking to meet. She burned it. She burned everything. And now, years later, fate brought me back. Except he didn't recognize me. How could he? He had never seen my face, only known my words. And now, he couldn't even see those. Still, I stayed. Through his insults, his silence, his anger. I stayed because deep down, I knew he wasn't cruel. He was lost. And in that emptiness, I found purpose. Until that morning. I was bringing him his usual, black tea, no sugar, when the doctor pulled me aside. "Eleanor," he said, no longer calling me Miss Whitmore, "his sight may come back. The damage is less permanent than we thought. There's hope now." It was the news everyone wanted to hear. Except me. Because I knew exactly what would happen when he saw again. He would look around and realize I didn't belong in his world. That I never did. Still, I pretended to be glad. I smiled. I served his tea. I stood quietly in the corner of the room as Charles held the mirror for the first time in 3 years. His hands trembled. His breath caught in his throat. "Light," he whispered. "I can see, light." Lady Ashford wept in joy. I watched in silence. By the end of the week, he was walking unaided, his eyes still adjusting. But his heart had already moved on. The first person he asked to see was not me. It was Daphne. Daphne Harrington. Childhood friend. Socialite. Future baroness. He clung to her like a lifeline, as if she was the answer to all his prayers. She arrived in a flurry of perfume and pearls, throwing herself into his arms as though no time had passed. "And me?" "Miss Whitmore," he said coldly, as though reading a line from a script, "your services are no longer required." I froze. "Thank you for everything. You've helped." That was it. No warmth. No hesitation. As if I had merely dusted the shelves, tended the flowers. Lady Ashford handed me an envelope as I gathered my things. A thick, crisp check. "We're grateful, dear. Truly. You've gone above and beyond for someone in your position." Someone in your position. She didn't need to say more. I walked out of Ashford Manor with nothing but my suitcase and my pride barely intact. The winter air bit at my cheeks. Snow fell gently on the gravel path as I passed the gate for the last time. Behind me, the lights glowed warm and golden from the windows. Laughter echoed from the drawing room. Ahead of me, only the road. But I didn't cry. I had already shed too many tears for a man who couldn't even remember the girl he once promised to love forever. No, I didn't cry. Not yet. Because my story wasn't ending. It was just about to begin. 3 months had passed since I left Ashford Manor. I found myself in a modest flat above a flower shop in York, with creaky floors and a leaky tap that sang at night. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. No Lady Ashford, no velvet walls, no cold silver teapots. Just quiet freedom and the scent of fresh peonies drifting up through the floorboards. By day, I worked at a second-hand bookshop down the street, where the customers were gentle and the pace was slow. I wore jumpers far too big for me and tied my hair in a loose braid. No one knew who I was. No one looked at me like I didn't belong. And slowly, I began to forget. Not fully. But enough to let my breath return. Until it arrived. A heavy ivory envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. No return address, just my name in perfect calligraphy, Miss Elena Whitmore. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first line read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Charles Ashford and Lady Daphne Harrington." I laughed. Out loud. A short, bitter sound that startled even me. He wanted me at his wedding. Why? To prove something? To parade her in front of me like a trophy? Or perhaps because, deep down, he knew. Knew I was more than the girl who brought his tea. Knew there was something between us that hadn't quite burned away. Or maybe he was simply cruel. Still, I stared at that invitation for hours, my fingers tracing the gold edges until they began to smudge. The date was clear. Saturday, the 10th of October. I circled it on the calendar without knowing why. The next day, I ran into Alice, the woman who owned the flower shop downstairs. She was arranging roses by the window, her arms covered in thorns and petals. "Elena," she said, "you've been pale all morning." "Bad news?" "Not exactly," I murmured, then added with a strange smile, "Actually, I think it might be good news." Because in that moment, a seed planted itself in my mind. A tiny, wicked, brilliant seed. I could decline the invitation and vanish. Or I could make sure that they never forgot me. Charles wanted to show me he had moved on. What if I showed him that so had I? And what better way than to choose the same day? I didn't have a fiancé. But I had something far more dangerous. I had a plan. If I was to steal their spotlight, I couldn't do it alone. York was full of characters, students, artists, drifters, and dreamers. But I needed someone believable. Not too polished, not too perfect. Someone with just the right edge to make it all seem real. That's when I remembered Hugo Blake. He used to stop by the bookshop every Thursday, usually half-soaked from the rain, looking for poetry collections and rarely buying any. A struggling actor with a laugh too loud for the room and a face that was impossible to forget. He'd once told me he could cry on cue. So, I invited him for coffee. We met at a quiet cafe tucked between a bakery and a vintage dress shop. Hugo arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a battered coat and fingerless gloves, his dark curls still damp from the drizzle. "Elena Whitmore," he said, grinning as he collapsed into the chair. "Didn't expect to see you outside the bookshop. What's the occasion?" "I need a fiancé," I replied without hesitation. He blinked. Then laughed. "That's one hell of a pick-up line." "I'm serious." I slid the invitation across the table. Watched his brow arch as he read. "You want to fake an engagement, to crash your ex's wedding, on the same day." Not crash, I said calmly. Just outshine. He sat back, tapping the card with his fingers. You're mad. I like it. So we made a pact, sealed with the clink of coffee mugs. We would spend the next 2 months creating the illusion of a whirlwind romance. Social media posts, matching outfits, a believable backstory. Hugo had ideas. Too many, actually. Fake holiday photos, a romantic picnic shoot in the moors, even a pretend proposal by the river. But beneath the rehearsals and staged affection, something unexpected began to stir. He made me laugh. Properly laugh. Not the hollow, polite sound I used to give Charles. He noticed things, when I skipped lunch, when I was quiet, when I couldn't sleep. He never pushed. Just showed up with pastries and a smirk. You know, he said once while adjusting my coat collar, you deserve someone who's not just pretending. I pretended not to hear. Because this wasn't about falling in love. It was about showing the world, showing them, that I had risen from the ashes. But part of me started to wonder what it would be like, if this were real. And that terrified me more than anything. The first invitation went to Charles. It arrived at his office in a pale cream envelope, my new surname elegantly printed across the front. Not Whitmore. Something else. Something stronger. Inside, embossed in gold, were the words. Elena Grace and Hugo Blake request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their marriage. I imagined the look on his face. Confusion. Then disbelief. And finally, that brittle smile he wore when he couldn't control the narrative. The second invitation went to Clara. I didn't need to see her reaction. I already knew. She had always been the center of attention, the prettier sister, the louder one, the risk-taker. But this time, the spotlight wasn't hers. And it was killing her. Our wedding announcement flooded social media. We weren't subtle. Romantic photos by the cliffs in Whitby. Candlelit dinners. Hugo kneeling with a ring in the gardens behind the cathedral. Dozens of comments poured in, friends from university, neighbors, even old colleagues from the bookshop. Didn't even know you two were dating. You look so happy, Elena. This feels like a fairy tale. It was working. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. One afternoon, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Margaret. She had been my father's sister, sharp-tongued and fiercely private, the kind of woman who wore brooches like medals and judged people by the way they held their tea. She'd never liked Charles. I hadn't invited her to my original wedding. I'd assumed she wouldn't care. Now she was calling me. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering. Elena, she said, her voice like gravel over velvet. Your announcement. It surprised me. I didn't respond. Then she said something that made my skin prickle. You do realize what day you've chosen, don't you? Of course I do. There was a pause. A heavy one. That date, she continued slowly, is more cursed than blessed. It's not just theirs, it never was. There are things you don't know, girl. I laughed nervously. It's just a coincidence. But it wasn't. And her words wouldn't leave me. That night, I sat by the window while Hugo reheated takeaway in the kitchen. The sky outside was bruised purple, clouds thick and low like secrets pressing against the world. What did Aunt Margaret mean? What history did that date hold? I tried to push it aside. Tried to focus on the plan. The dress fitting. The caterers. The seating chart. But even as I smiled for staged photos with Hugo, something had shifted in the background. Something old. Something waiting. The week before the wedding, everything should have felt perfect. But the feeling I couldn't shake was dread. Not cold feet. Not second thoughts. Just unease. The kind that settles in your bones and whispers when you're alone. It started with the florist. We've had a strange delay with the peonies, she said, her voice tight. Our shipment from the Lake District never arrived. A frost came early. Killed most of them. Then the caterer cancelled. Food poisoning in their staff. Unforeseen, unavoidable. We're terribly sorry, Miss Grace. We'll do what we can to find a replacement. By the third disruption, a seamstress who suddenly quit mid-fitting, I began to wonder. Hugo noticed my silence. You all right? He asked gently as he poured 2 mugs of tea, the kind with bergamot that I usually adored. I'm fine, I lied. But my hands were cold even in front of the fire. That night, I opened the old box from my mother's attic. I don't know why. It had been sitting in the back of the cupboard since she passed, gathering dust, too painful to touch. But something told me to. Inside, I found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a photograph of my mother in her wedding gown, and a small leather-bound diary. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My dearest Elena. My name. The first page wasn't dated, but I could feel the years in the paper. It had belonged to her, my mother. And what she wrote chilled me. I should never have agreed to that date. Your grandmother warned me, but I thought she was being dramatic. Now I know better. I turned the page. That day took something from us. I don't know if it's the house, or the family, or just the name itself. But it always starts with a wedding. The next few entries were smudged with what looked like water damage, or tears. I kept reading. Your father was never the same after. The things he saw. The voices. The dreams. He stopped sleeping. Stopped looking me in the eye. And when we lost her. I knew it wasn't coincidence. My breath caught. The baby. I never had a sister. Or did I? I looked back at the wedding date on the invitation, printed in gold foil, shining under the lamp's glow. The same day. Exactly the same. The wind howled outside, loud and bitter. Something clattered against the window. I flinched. Elena. Hugo called from upstairs. You all right down there? Yes, I replied automatically. But I wasn't. Because now I understood what Aunt Margaret meant. There was a reason no one ever celebrated anything on the 14th of October in our family. Not anymore. Not after what happened. And here I was, about to do it again. The morning sun shone deceptively warm on the day before the wedding. I walked through the village square with my list clutched tightly in one hand. It was meant to be a day of final touches, florals, favors, table placements. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about the diary. And the baby I never knew existed. A part of me wanted to ask my aunt about it. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear that I already knew the answer. I visited the church to check the seating. St. Mark's had stood for centuries, its walls thick with secrets and candle smoke. As I stepped inside, the air shifted. Cold. Still. The vicar was finishing a prayer near the altar. He turned, his face lined with concern. Miss Grace, he greeted gently. A day early. I smiled politely, my hands trembling. Just wanted to see how it looked. He nodded, then hesitated. I know it's not my place, but I remember your mother's wedding. I was just a young curate then. I turned to face him. You do. He looked down at his folded hands. She was radiant that day. But something felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it. Afterward, things changed in the village. He looked up, and for a moment, he seemed as though he might say more. But then he pressed his lips together and gave a weak smile. Perhaps I'm just getting old. I left the church with a growing weight in my chest. Outside, the wind had picked up. It tugged at my coat and tangled my hair. The sky darkened, clouds crawling across the horizon like bruises. As I walked back to the manor, I saw her again. A woman in grey, standing at the edge of the woods. Barefoot. Watching me. Not moving. I blinked. She was gone. I hurried home. That evening, Hugo found me in the drawing room, the old diary in my lap. "You're quiet again," he said, kneeling in front of me. "Do you want to call it off?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No. Just nerves." But that was a lie. Because I had finally read the last page of the diary. "If you ever find this, Elena, please, don't repeat the date. Don't invite them in. Once the veil is lifted, they won't go back. They never go back." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not even after Hugo drifted off beside me. Just before midnight, I heard the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. I held my breath. The sound stopped outside our door. Then, with the gentlest pressure, the handle began to turn. The door never opened. It just stopped turning. I waited, frozen in bed, the covers pulled up to my chin. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might wake Hugo. But nothing else happened. Morning came grey and still, as though the entire world held its breath. It was my wedding day. The house stirred slowly, filled with the quiet shuffles of people trying to hold on to normalcy. My aunt brought tea, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You're strong. You always have been." I smiled. Numb. The dress lay across the bed like a ghost waiting to be worn. Ivory silk. Tiny embroidered lilies on the sleeves. My mother's veil sat beside it, its lace slightly yellowed with time. As I slipped it on, something shifted in the mirror. For a second, just a blink, I didn't see myself. I saw her. The woman in grey. Standing behind me. No expression. No movement. I spun around. Nothing there. "Steady," I muttered to myself. Downstairs, the carriage waited. A vintage Bentley with silver trim, hired specially for the day. Hugo's best man, Peter, stood at the door, eyes wide as he saw me descend the stairs. "You look," he started. But then he stopped. Frowned. "Everything all right?" I asked. He hesitated. "I thought I saw someone on the landing behind you." I turned, blood running cold. "Who?" He shrugged. "Must have been a shadow." The journey to the church felt like traveling through fog. Villagers lined the streets, their faces kind but quiet, like they knew something I didn't. Some clutched flowers. Others simply watched. At St. Mark's, the bells began to ring. Inside, the air was thick. The candles burned lower than usual. My heels clicked on the stone floor as I walked slowly toward the altar, Hugo waiting with a nervous smile. The vicar welcomed us, his voice clear but with a strange tremor. "Dearly beloved," he began. "We are gathered here today." I took Hugo's hand. Then the door creaked open. Not the main doors, those were closed. It was the side entrance. And through it walked a figure dressed in black, face hidden beneath a lace veil. Every head turned. Whispers broke out. Even the vicar faltered. The woman moved with slow, deliberate steps, and stopped in the last pew. I tried to ignore her, but something inside me screamed to run. The vows continued. But the air grew colder with every word. And when Hugo slid the ring onto my finger, the candles flickered wildly, then went out. Gasps filled the church. Then silence. The flames returned slowly, as if someone relit them with invisible hands. But the warmth never came back. The woman in black remained seated. Still. Watching. I tightened my grip on Hugo's hand. His knuckles were white. The vicar continued, voice unsteady now. Do you, Hugo Alistair Bennett, take Evelyn Rose Cavendish? But I couldn't focus on the words. Something had shifted. Like we had crossed into another place, one layered beneath the church's stones. The woman was part of it. Hugo's lips moved. I do. The vicar turned to me. And do you, Evelyn Rose Cavendish? The name echoed strangely. I opened my mouth. But before I could speak, the door behind the altar slammed shut. Not gently. Not by wind. It banged like it had been thrown. Every guest jumped. A child screamed. I turned. That door hadn't been used in years. It led to the old crypt. No one should have had access. I looked at the vicar. His face had gone pale. I need a moment, I whispered. I stepped back, letting my bridesmaids close in around me. The whispers in the pews grew louder. I caught words like curse, ill omen, her mother. Down the side aisle, the woman in black stood slowly. She glided toward the front. Every step echoed, too loud. She stopped at the altar rail. Removed her veil. Gasps again. A few people stood in shock. It was Aunt Harriet. Only, her face was twisted. Different. Cold. Her eyes were too dark. And then she spoke. You made a vow once before, Evelyn, she said softly. But you never fulfilled it. I don't know what you mean, I stammered. You promised to return what was never yours, she whispered. Hugo looked from me to her. What is this? My legs trembled. Memories came back. The locked room at Grantham Hall. The diary I found as a child. The one that disappeared. The stories of the Cavendish curse. Of women who married on cursed ground. Aunt Harriet lifted something from her cloak. A mirror. Not just any mirror. My mother's mirror. Cracked. Blackened at the edges. You broke it, she said. Now you must mend what you shattered. The ground rumbled. Not imagined. Stone. Moving. The tiles beneath our feet shifted with a deep groan. Guests screamed, scrambling back. The mirror flashed. And I saw her again. Not Aunt Harriet. Her. The grey woman. Reaching through the glass. Hand outstretched.